So I've decided to give Dragon Ball FighterZ one final try and see if I don't like the game or not. Now at the beginning, I did follow this game very closely and I did go in with an open mind. That said, I have read about all the updates to where the game is supposed to be a bit more balanced. But I've also read and watched videos about how certain characters are so OP. So much so that even the likes of Sonic Fox was talking about banning GT Goku. I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, so let me explain why I quit playing to begin with. To start, I did begin playing Dragon Ball FighterZ with my friends during the beta and the launch. Sadly, I quickly began to not like the game maybe a few months in. This mainly being due to the lack of defensive options and the fact that a lot of the characters in the roster play the same. This not even counting the number of Gokus in the game. Be that as it may, I did continue to keep playing the game to see maybe if it was just me. And obviously, as you can tell, I don't think it's me. You see, my biggest complaints with Dragon Ball FighterZ are three specific things: lack of diversity in the cast and how they play, lack of defensive options, and the game being somewhat of a blocking simulator. Don't worry, I'll explain each of these points one by one. First up, the lack of diversity in the cast. There's a reason the game is basically Goku Fighters is a joke to begin with, because in the entire roster there are 5 different Gokus. This number jumps up to 13 if you count the number of characters that are part Goku. Now that would be a bit unfair since some of those characters do play differently, but the problem still remains there's an extreme lack of diversity in the cast compared to older Dragon Ball games. One of my favorite Dragon Ball games of all time is Budokai Tenkaichi 3, which had a really large roster. Now yes, one can argue that a lot of those characters were filler characters that weren't unique in any way, which I would grant you until I bring up the older unique characters, such as General Tao, Master Roshi, Oob, Deborah, or Omega Shenron. Those are just some of the characters that I cared to actually look up though. My point here is that we have multiple forms of characters but a real lack of diversity in them. Which leads me to the other half of this problem, the characters being unique. Now I understand that in fighting games, when you have an evil version of a character, they're going to play very similar to the original. But in Dragon Ball FighterZ, so many characters play the same with similar combo structure, so much so to the fact that the only thing that it feels different is the super or their assists, which is often how players end up building their teams. I understand that Dragon Ball fights mainly take place in the air, and the game is trying to stay true to the source material. But every character feeling the exact same is a real turnoff for me. Especially when I played the game when it first came out, less than half the roster actually felt unique. Now anyone who follows my channel knows I'm a cross-tag battle player. And when the game came out after FighterZ, a lot of people complained about how simple it was. The difference is though, is that while both games are very simple, when it comes to cross-tag battle, characters actually do feel different from one another. It doesn't feel like I'm picking another version of certain characters. Yes, some characters will fall into the categories as one another, but their movements and movelets are still very different. More characters definitely feel unique now, but as I said, when I played the game at the very beginning of its lifespan, this wasn't the case. The next problem that I have with the game is the utter lack of defensive option. The game is built to be as defensive as possible, wouldn't be an issue if the player on defense actually had their own options as well. Yes, there's an emergency switch and a reflect, but that's just 2 options in the game where losing a character in one touch is very normal. And it just takes the fun out of the game when you have no options when you're on defense. And the game basically comes down to, have you seen what your opponent is doing before? If not, then well, that's a character that's going to be gone for you. The lack of defensive options goes hand in hand with my final problem I have with the game. That being, the game feels like a blocking simulator. This being because blocking in this game can last quite a long time. So when you combine sparse options when you're on defense and you have very long times of blocking, you have a recipe for a bad game in my opinion. All of this is constantly overlooked though because the series on the box is Dragon Ball. I mean, people will lay into any game that's lacking depth if it doesn't have a big name on the box. But when it comes to a series that people are willing to defend until the end of time, criticism is not allowed. I would definitely consider playing the next iteration of this game, maybe if it's 1v1 or even 2v2. But 3v3 causes a lot of issues and I don't think they're fixable in the current version of the game. The next iteration of the game would have to have real options for the player on defense, because the game being far too rewarding for the player on offense is just a problem to me. It feels like you're punishing the player who's on defense because they're on defense. Given how many copies the game sold, I would wager a sequel for the game would definitely be in the works, but the game needs to be a bit more balanced and have a bit more of a varied roster for me. Because before you know it, we'll have another Goku, because after all, Mastered Ultra Instinct isn't even in the game. Well, that's my thought on Dragon Ball FighterZ. Do you guys play it? Am I way off or am I missing something? Let me know in the comments below.